They thought my trauma was a punchline. Every laugh felt like another bullet piercing through what was left of my sanity. The backyard barbecue reeked of beer and bravado, my father's voice booming over the crowd as he mocked his fragile daughter who couldn't handle a little war. But when a Navy SEAL grabbed the microphone and spoke my truth out loud, revealing I was the medic who'd saved 12 men under fire, including him, the whole party went silent. That night, respect finally had a voice, and shame had nowhere to hide. My name is Emily Ward, and I used to fly angels of mercy through hell itself. Now I stood in my parents' backyard in Wilmington, North Carolina, watching smoke rise from the grill while my father turned my service into a comedy routine. So there I was, thinking my daughter's following the family tradition, Dad bellowed, his Marine Corps tattoo visible under his rolled-up sleeve. Turns out she couldn't hack it. 3 tours and she comes back crying about nightmares. PTSD, they call it now. Back in my day, we called it Tuesday. The laughter rippled through the crowd of neighbors, Dad's old Marine buddies, and relatives who'd driven down for Mom's 60th birthday. Each chuckle felt like shrapnel embedding itself deeper into my chest. I gripped my beer bottle so tight I thought it might shatter, focusing on the condensation running down the glass instead of the memories threatening to surface. "Tell them about the discharge papers," Mom chimed in, her voice wine-slurred and sharp. "Honorable discharge at 33. My friend's kids are making colonel, and mine's collecting disability for bad dreams." I forced a smile. The same one I'd perfected during officer meetings when male pilots questioned my decisions. The same one I wore when I pulled men twice my size from burning wreckage while rounds peppered the sand around us. Nobody here knew about Yemen. Nobody knew about the Black Hawk that went down, or the 12 hours I spent keeping men alive with half my medical supplies destroyed. "Maybe she just missed her teddy bear too much over there," Uncle Pete added, raising his beer in mock salute. "Not everyone's cut out for the real military. That's why they put women in support roles." Support roles. I'd been a flight medic on a medevac crew, flying into hot zones while these men grilled burgers and shared stories from their peacetime service 40 years ago. My call sign had been Echo 9, and insurgents had put a bounty on our helicopter because we'd extracted so many wounded from their ambushes. The sun was setting now, painting the sky the same orange as the flames I'd flown through to reach a downed SEAL team. My hands started trembling not from fear, but from the effort of keeping them still. Dr. Morrison called it hypervigilance, a symptom of my brain still thinking I was in combat. Dad called it weakness. "You should see her jump at fireworks." My brother Kyle laughed, fresh out of Navy basic training and already convinced he knew everything about warfare. "Last 4th of July, she hit the deck when someone lit a bottle rocket. Embarrassing as hell." The crowd erupted again, and I saw Mrs. Henderson from next door actually slap her knee. These people had known me since I was 5, had cheered when I got my wings, had thrown me a party when I deployed. Now they fed on my trauma like vultures on carrion. The worst part was the medal in my pocket, my challenge coin from the Night Stalkers, the one they'd given me after the Yemen operation. The citation was classified, so I couldn't even defend myself with the truth. All they saw was a woman who'd broken under pressure, not the pilot who'd flown 18 hours straight through a sandstorm to extract critical casualties. "I need another beer," I muttered, standing up from the picnic table. "Don't take too long, sweetheart," Dad called after me. "I'm just getting to the part where you tried to get a therapy dog. A therapy dog. Can you imagine my daughter needing a puppy to function?" I walked toward the house, each step measured and controlled, the way I'd learned to move when every sound could mean an ambush. Behind me, the laughter continued, mixing with the smoke from the grill and the sound of waves from the nearby coast. It sounded like the echo of rotor blades, like the static of radio calls for help, like the last words of the Marine who died in my arms while I tried to stop the bleeding with my bare hands. They thought my silence was shame. They were wrong. My silence was the only thing keeping me from telling them exactly what their joke of a daughter had done while they sat safe at home, watching war on CNN and thinking they understood what honor meant. The beach behind our house had always been my sanctuary, but tonight it felt like a confessional. The party noise faded as I walked further into the darkness, leaving only the rhythmic crash of waves and the distant thump of bass from someone's speakers. It was nearly 11:30 p.m., and the moon painted everything in silver and shadow. I sat on the cold sand, letting the grains slip through my fingers like the minutes I'd counted during that last mission. Yemen. Even the name tasted like dust and blood in my mouth. Nobody at that party knew what happened on February 15th, 2023. The mission that broke me wasn't classified because it failed. It was classified because of what we'd uncovered. The memories came in fragments, the way they always did. The distress call at 0200 hours. My crew chief, Martinez, shouting coordinates over the rotor noise. The SEAL team pinned down in a compound that was supposed to be empty but turned into an ambush. 2 Blackhawks already down, their burning wreckage lighting up the desert like funeral pyres. I pulled my knees to my chest, feeling the phantom weight of my flight vest, the medical supplies that had run out too fast. We'd gone in anyway, against orders, because I could hear them screaming over the radio, young men calling for their mothers, for God, for anyone who could make the bleeding stop. Echo 9, wave off hot LZ. But I didn't wave off. I dropped us into that hell because that's what flight medics do. We don't leave people behind. The RPG that finally clipped our tail rotor sent us spinning, and I can still feel the impact, my body slamming against the cabin wall, Martinez's blood on my visor. My hands found the small metal box I'd buried in the sand weeks ago, right after I'd come home. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was my flight badge and the medical insignia I'd worn with such pride. Under those was the photo I couldn't bear to look at but couldn't throw away my crew. Martinez didn't make it home. Neither did Thompson, our pilot, who held the stick steady long enough for me to pull 3 SEALs into the cabin before the second RPG hit. The terror wasn't from the explosions or the bullets. It was from the moment I had to choose which wounded to save first when everyone was dying. The young SEAL who reminded me of Kyle. Intestines spilling through my fingers as I tried to pack the wound. The sergeant whose femoral artery painted my uniform red. The quiet one who just kept saying, please, over and over while I ran out of morphine. 12 saved, 2 lost. That's what the after-action report said. Clean numbers that didn't capture the weight of Thompson's body as I dragged him from the wreckage, hoping against hope for a pulse that never came. Statistics that didn't measure the sound Martinez made when the shrapnel found him, or how he squeezed my hand before the light left his eyes. My phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Morrison. Remember, Emily. You did everything you could with what you had. The survivors are alive because of you. The survivors. One of them had written me a letter last month. His name was Ray Dalton, a commander now, stationed at Little Creek, just 2 hours north. He'd said if I ever needed anything, just call. He'd said I saved his life, that his kids got to keep their father because of me. I hadn't responded. What do you say to someone whose blood you can still feel on your hands? The challenge coin felt heavy in my pocket. Night Stalkers Don't Quit was engraved on one side. But I did quit. I quit when the nightmares got so bad I couldn't fly anymore without seeing Thompson's face in every reflection on the cockpit glass. I quit when I started hearing Martinez calling my name in every helicopter that flew overhead. Back at the house, I could hear Dad's booming laugh, probably telling another story about his weak daughter. He'd served 4 years in peacetime, never saw combat, never held a dying 18-year-old who was calling for his mom. But he wore his veteran status like armor, while I hid mine like a scar. I stood up, brushing sand from my jeans. Tomorrow, they'd probably have another laugh about finding me out here, sulking like a teenager. They'd never understand that this beach was the only place quiet enough for me to honor my dead, to whisper their names to the waves: Martinez, Thompson, Peterson, Williams, the 2 SEALs I couldn't save. The box went back into its hiding spot, deep enough that the tide wouldn't find it. my secrets buried in the sand, just like the truth of what their disappointment of a daughter had really done over there. But I made a promise to the moon and the memories if they mocked me one more time. If they turned my brother's sacrifice into another punchline, I wouldn't stay silent. I walked back toward the house, toward the laughter and the lies, carrying my ghosts with me like the honor they thought I'd lost. The kitchen smelled like bacon and disappointment. 7:15 and Dad was already holding court at the breakfast table, his Marine Corps memorabilia displayed on the wall behind him like a shrine to his 4 years of motor pool duty in peacetime Germany. His bronze star for meritorious service, not combat, gleamed in its frame, positioned perfectly to catch the morning light. "Kyle's getting his SEAL pin next month," Mom announced, sliding eggs onto his plate like she was serving royalty. "Can you imagine a real Navy SEAL in the family?" My brother sat straighter, chest puffed out even though he'd only completed basic training and hadn't even started Bud S yet. The confidence of ignorance, I thought, spreading butter on toast I didn't want to eat. "That's what real warriors do," Dad said, pointing his fork at Kyle. "They push through. They don't come home crying about stress and nightmares. No offense, Emily, but maybe you should have chosen a different Moss. Something more suitable. Like the female logistics officer he'd always wanted me to be. Safe behind a desk, counting supplies instead of applying tourniquets in a spinning helicopter. The SEALs are the tip of the spear," Kyle added, drowning his eggs in hot sauce. "No offense. But medevac is basically just an ambulance with rotors. Support role, important. Sure, but not exactly the front lines." I watched him eat. This boy who'd never heard bullets crack past his head, who'd never made life or death decisions at 200 feet while taking fire. He didn't know that medevac crews had one of the highest casualty rates in theater because we flew into places everyone else was trying to leave. "Your sister did serve 3 tours, Mom said, but her tone suggested she was mentioning a participation trophy, not combat deployments. Though I still don't understand why they gave her that medal if she can't even talk about what happened. The Distinguished Flying Cross sat in a box under my bed, along with the Purple Heart I'd never told them about. The citation was mostly redacted, but the parts they could read should have been enough extraordinary heroism while participating in aerial flight. They'd never asked to see it. "Medals don't mean much if you can't function afterward," Dad said, tapping his bronze star's frame. "I came back from Germany ready to build a life. Started my business, raised a family. That's what veterans do. We adapt and overcome." "Exactly," Kyle chimed in, mouth full of bacon. "My instructor says PTSD is just an excuse for people who can't handle the real military. He says real operators compartmentalize." I set down my coffee cup harder than necessary. "Your instructor sounds like he's never seen combat." "He's trained hundreds of SEALs," Kyle shot back. "Pretty sure he knows more about warfare than a helicopter nurse." Flight medic. The words stuck in my throat. I'd been a flight medic with additional pilot training, qualified to take the controls if needed. Which I had, when Thompson took shrapnel to the head and I had to fly us out one-handed while applying pressure to Martinez's wounds with the other. Dad stood up, moving to the wall of honors his medals, Kyle's basic training graduation photo, and pointedly, "Nothing of mine. You know what your problem is. Emily, you went over there thinking you were some kind of hero, but heroes don't break. Heroes come home and continue serving their community. Like you did in the motor pool." The words escaped before I could stop them. Silence fell over the kitchen like a mortar round. "I served my country with honor," Dad said slowly, his face reddening. "I didn't quit. I didn't come home begging for disability payments and therapy sessions. I didn't embarrass my family." "She's getting 70% disability," Mom added, as if sharing a shameful secret. "For invisible wounds. Meanwhile, Mrs. Patterson's son lost his leg in Afghanistan, and he's already running marathons." Kyle laughed. Actually laughed. "Maybe I should claim PTSD from basic. Drill sergeant yelled at me pretty hard. Think I can get a paycheck for life?" They kept talking, planning Kyle's future glory, comparing him to every SEAL they'd seen on TV documentaries. Dad pulled out his phone to show a YouTube video of what real special forces look like. Mom started planning Kyle's graduation party, assuming he'd make it through training that eliminated 75% of candidates. I stood up, leaving my untouched breakfast on the table. As I walked past the wall of honors, I noticed something that had always been there but never registered before. Dad's Bronze Star citation. I could see it clearly now. For exceptional meritorious service in maintaining vehicle readiness rates above 90%. He'd gotten his medal for fixing trucks. I'd gotten mine for flying through hell to save lives. But in this house, his service was strength, and mine was weakness. "Where are you going?" Mom called after me. "Out," I said, not trusting myself to say more. Probably to her safe space. Kyle snorted. "Don't forget your therapy dog, sis." Oh wait, they denied that request, didn't they? Even the VA thinks you're being dramatic. The door closed on their laughter, but I could still hear it echoing in my head, mixing with the sound of Martinez calling my name, Thompson's last breath, and the screams of men I couldn't save. In this house of heroes, I was the only one who'd actually seen war, and somehow that made me the failure. The July heat shimmered off the concrete as guests arrived for Dad's annual Freedom Fest, his name for the barbecue he threw every year to celebrate his Marine Corps service. By 3 p.m., the backyard was packed with his old unit buddies, neighbors, and enough flags to outfit a parade. I'd tried to skip it, but Mom threatened to tell everyone I was having another episode if I didn't show up. I nursed a beer in the corner, watching Kyle work the crowd like a politician, telling everyone about his upcoming BUDS training. He'd already failed to mention he hadn't technically been selected yet, just accepted to try out. Details didn't matter when you were selling a fantasy. "There's my boy." Dad's voice boomed across the yard as a new arrival entered through the side gate. Ray Dalton. "Get over here, you son of a bitch." My blood turned to ice. Commander Ray Dalton. The SEAL whose letter sat unopened in my nightstand drawer. The one whose blood had covered my hands as I'd fought to keep his intestines inside his body while we flew through a sandstorm. He was here, at my father's party. Ray looked different in civilian clothes polo shirt, khakis, the suburban dad uniform, but his eyes hadn't changed. Those same gray eyes that had locked onto mine in the helicopter when he'd asked if he was going to die. And I'd lied and said no, even though I wasn't sure I could save him. "This is my boy Kyle," Dad said, pushing my brother forward. "Future SEAL, maybe you can give him some tips." Ray. "And this is Emily," Mom added, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "Our daughter. She was in the Navy, too. Medical Corps or something." Ray's head snapped toward me, those gray eyes widening in recognition. I saw his mouth form the words Echo 9, but no sound came out. He took a step toward me, then stopped, reading something in my face that made him understand they didn't know. "Medical Corps," Ray repeated slowly, his voice carrying an edge that made Dad look up. "Right." Kyle, oblivious to the tension, launched into his rehearsed speech about honor and brotherhood and how he couldn't wait to join the teams. Ray listened politely, but his eyes kept drifting to me, to the way I stood apart from everyone, to the slight tremor in my hands that I couldn't quite control. "So Emily here has PTSD, Kyle said suddenly, laughing as he grabbed another beer. "Can you believe it? From flying med runs, I keep telling her, wait until you see real combat, right, like what you guys do. That's the stuff that actually matters." The yard seemed to hold its breath. Ray set down his beer very carefully, the same controlled movement I'd seen him use when he was fighting through pain that should have killed him. "Flying med runs," Ray repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Is that what she told you?" "She doesn't talk about it much," Dad interjected, waving dismissively. "Too traumatic, apparently. Though between you and me, Ray, I think some people just aren't cut out for military service. No shame in it, but they should admit it instead of claiming disability for hurt feelings." "Hurt feelings." Ray's jaw tightened. He looked at me again, and I saw the moment he understood everything, the shame they'd heaped on me, the jokes, the dismissal of my service. You really don't know, do you? Know what? Mom asked, her party smile faltering. Ray walked over to where I stood, stopping just close enough that I could smell his cologne mixing with the memory of blood and sand. I wrote you, he said quietly. You never answered. I couldn't, I managed, my voice barely a whisper. I get it now, he said, looking back at my family. They don't know what you did. They don't know about Yemen. Kyle laughed nervously. What's there to know? She flew helicopters. Big deal. You guys are the ones doing the real work. Why? Ray's expression shifted, something dark and dangerous flickering across his features. He looked at me one more time, silently asking permission. I didn't nod, but I didn't shake my head either. I just stood there, frozen, as he turned back to face my family. Your sister, he said slowly, each word deliberate. Flew helicopters. That's true. But do you want to know what else is true? The party noise continued around us kids playing, music from someone's speaker, the sizzle of burgers on the grill. But in our little corner, a bomb was about to drop, and only Ray and I could hear the whistle of its descent. What are you talking about? Dad asked, his perpetual confidence beginning to crack. Ray picked up his beer again, took a long sip, and then looked Dad straight in the eye. I'm talking about February 15th, 2023. I'm talking about a medevac pilot who violated direct orders to extract 12 men from a hot LZ. I'm talking about your daughter. The silence spread outward like ripples on water, conversations dying as people sensed the shift in atmosphere. Kyle's smirk faded. Mom's wine glass trembled in her hand. And Dad looked like someone had just told him the world was flat after all. That's impossible, Dad said. Emily was just medical support. She saved my life, Ray interrupted, his voice rising, while taking direct fire, after her pilot was killed, flying with one hand while treating casualties with the other. Your daughter, the one you think is weak, is the reason I'm standing here. The words hung in the air like smoke from the grill, heavy and choking. I felt everyone's eyes on me, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The truth was out, bleeding into the open like a wound that wouldn't close. Ray grabbed the karaoke microphone from the DJ stand, the feedback squeal cutting through the party chatter like an alarm. Every head turned. The music stopped. Even the kids stopped playing, sensing the gravity in a Navy SEAL commander's stance. Excuse me, everyone, Ray's voice carried across the yard with military precision. I need to correct something. A grave misunderstanding about honor, service, and the person you've been laughing at all afternoon. Dad stepped forward. Ray, I don't think... Sit down, Marine. The command in Ray's voice made Dad freeze. You had your say. You've had your laughs. Now you're going to listen. The entire backyard fell silent. Even the breeze seemed to still, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Ray stood in the center of the yard, the microphone steady in his hand, his gray eyes scanning the crowd before landing on me. February 15th, 2023, 0200 hours, Helmand Province, Yemen. My team was ambushed. 2 Blackhawks already down, burning. 17 men trapped, taking heavy fire. Command ordered all aircraft to wave off. Too dangerous, they said. Certain death. He paused, letting the words sink in. Mrs. Henderson had put down her drink. Kyle's mouth hung slightly open. Then we heard her on the radio. Call sign Echo 9, female voice, steady as steel. This is medevac inbound. I don't leave people behind. Command screamed at her to abort. She turned off the radio and flew straight into hell. My legs felt weak. I gripped the fence post behind me, memories flooding back with each word, the heat, the smoke, the weight of the controls after Thompson died. Her pilot took a round through the head in the first 30 seconds. Ray continued, his voice growing harder. Sergeant Thompson, father of 3, dead instantly. Her crew chief, Martinez, was hit by shrapnel, bleeding out. And Emily, your daughter, your sister, the one you call weak, she took the controls with Thompson's blood on her visor and flew that bird one-handed while trying to keep Martinez alive with the other. Mom's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the concrete. Nobody moved to clean it up. She landed in a hot LZ with RPGs exploding around her. No gunner, no backup, just her and whatever medical supplies hadn't been shot to pieces. And she got out, you hear me. She got out of that helicopter and ran into the fire to drag wounded men to safety. Ray's voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat, maintaining his composure with visible effort. I was gut-shot, intestines hanging out, bleeding out fast. Your daughter held my insides in with her bare hands while dragging me to the bird. When we took off, another RPG clipped the tail rotor. We were spinning, losing altitude, and she fought those controls like she was wrestling God himself, all while performing field surgery on 3 critical patients. Kyle had gone pale. Dad's face was the color of ash. 12 men, Ray said, now looking directly at my father. She saved 12 men that night. Lost 2 Thompson and Martinez. She flew 18 hours straight to get us to safety, refusing to land even when she was losing blood from her own wounds. Purple Heart, Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor, Silver Star recommendation that got downgraded because, quote, it would be difficult to explain a woman performing at this level in combat. He turned to Kyle, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. You think PTSD is weakness. You think she's dramatic. Your sister has killed more enemy combatants than most infantry soldiers. She's performed surgery at 200 feet while taking machine gun fire. She's heard men die calling for their mothers and held their hands while they went. The nightmares she has aren't weakness, they're the price of being the angel of death and mercy all at once. Ray walked over to where I stood, tears streaming down my face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his own challenge coin, SEAL Team 6. This woman, he said, pressing the coin into my hand in front of everyone, is the reason my kids have a father. The reason 11 other families aren't folded flags on a mantle. You've been mocking a hero. A real one. Not peacetime service, not motor pool duty, not basic training stories. Actual combat. Actual sacrifice. He turned back to the stunned crowd, the microphone still in his hand. Every SEAL, Ranger, and Marine she saved knows her name. We call her the Angel of Yemen. There's a plaque at Little Creek with her call sign on it. We drink to her on February 15th every year. And you, her own family, you've been laughing at her trauma like it's a joke. The silence was complete now. I could hear hearts beating, breathing, the distant cry of a seagull. Dad's bronze star on his shirt looked tiny, insignificant. Kyle's future SEAL dreams seemed to evaporate in the afternoon heat. One more thing, Ray said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper that somehow carried further than a shout. The mission was classified because we uncovered intelligence that saved hundreds of lives. Your daughter can't even tell you the full scope of what she did. She's been carrying your mockery and the weight of secrets that would break most men. So the next time you want to laugh at her PTSD, remember she earned every nightmare, every flashback, every moment of pain by choosing to save lives while staring death in the face. He set the microphone down gently on the picnic table. The feedback hummed for a moment, then died. Ray walked back to me, and in full view of everyone, snapped to attention and rendered a perfect salute. Echo 9, he said formally. It remains the greatest honor of my life to have been saved by you. Behind him, the entire backyard full of veterans, neighbors, and family members stood frozen, processing the truth that had just detonated in their midst. The joke was over. The laughter had died. And for the first time since I'd come home, the silence felt like respect. The collapse was total and immediate. Dad's legs seemed to give out as he sank into a lawn chair, his bronze star catching the light as his chest heaved with shallow breaths. His face had gone from ash to ghost white, aging 10 years in 10 seconds. Mom stood frozen, wine staining her white sundress where the glass had shattered, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. You never said, Emily, why didn't you? The words wouldn't come. Her perfectly maintained composure, 30 years of military wife protocol, crumbled like tissue paper in rain. She reached out toward me, then pulled her hand back, as if afraid to touch me, as if I might disappear or break or turn out to be someone else entirely. Kyle had backed against the fence. His basic training bravado evaporated. The confidence that had filled him moments ago was gone, replaced by something that looked like terror. He kept shaking his head, muttering, "No way, no fucking way," under his breath, forgetting Mom's rule about language at family gatherings. The other guests stood in stunned tableau. Mrs. Henderson, who'd slapped her knee at Dad's PTSD jokes, now had tears running down her face. Dad's Marine buddies, the ones who'd laughed the loudest, couldn't meet my eyes. One of them, Garrett, who'd served in Desert Storm, slowly raised his beer toward me in silent salute, then set it down unopened. "The therapy dog," Mom whispered, her voice breaking. "You needed... Oh God, we mocked you for needing..." She pressed her hands to her mouth, muffling a sob. Dad tried to stand, failed, tried again. His hands were shaking. This man who'd prided himself on Marine bearing couldn't control his own body. "Emily, the things I said... Christ, the things I said to you..." "You called her weak," Ray said quietly, but his words cut through the yard like a blade. "You laughed at her nightmares. You, who never saw a day of combat, laughed at someone who held dying men in her arms." Kyle suddenly lunged forward, not at Ray, but toward the house. We heard him vomiting in the bushes, the sound carrying in the absolute silence. When he came back, wiping his mouth, he looked at me with hollow eyes. "The fireworks," he said hoarsely. "Last 4th of July. You hit the deck because they sound like RPGs," I said, my first words since Ray started speaking. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, steady and distant. The bottle rockets sound exactly like them, and when you laughed, all I could hear was Martinez screaming. Dad made a sound part moan, part whimper that I'd never heard from him before. This man who'd built his identity on strength and service, who'd displayed his bronze star like a talisman of superiority, was collapsing under the weight of his shame. "We didn't know," Mom kept repeating. "How could we not know our own daughter? We didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I said, finding my voice strengthening. "I tried to tell you, when I first came home. I tried, but you'd already decided what I was. Weak, dramatic, disappointing. It was easier to mock me than to ask why I was really discharged." The crowd began to disperse, guests mumbling excuses and apologies, unable to bear the weight of witnessing this family's destruction. Car doors slammed, engines started. Within minutes, only Ray and my immediate family remained in the backyard that now felt like a courtroom after a guilty verdict. "Your medal," Dad croaked, looking at me with desperate eyes. "The Distinguished Flying Cross? May I see it?" "It's in a box under my bed," I said, "along with the Purple Heart you never knew about, and the letters from the men I saved, and the photographs of Thompson and Martinez that I look at every night before I fail to sleep." Mom approached me slowly, as if I were a wounded animal that might flee. "The nightmares. You wake up screaming sometimes. Is it? It's Thompson's blood on my hands, Martinez calling my name, the weight of the bodies I carried, the sound of the helicopter breaking apart, the choice of who to save first when everyone's dying." I looked at each of them in turn. "It's the sound of your laughter when I came home broken from saving lives." Kyle slid down the fence until he was sitting on the ground, his head in his hands. "I'm supposed to start Bud S in 3 months. He said to no one in particular. I thought I knew what courage looked like. I thought. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. I called you weak. My own sister. Jesus Christ, I called you weak. Dad stood finally, unsteady, reaching for his bronze star and unpinning it from his shirt with trembling fingers. He looked at it for a long moment, this symbol he'd polished and displayed and built his identity around. Then he let it fall to the ground, the metal making a small, hollow sound against the concrete. I'm nobody, he said, his voice broken. A motor pool mechanic who spent 4 years in Germany drinking beer and fixing trucks. And I dared to mock someone who... He couldn't finish, doubling over as if physically struck by his shame. Ray stepped back, his job done, his truth delivered. He looked at me one more time, nodded with military precision, and headed for the gate. Before leaving, he turned back to my family. She doesn't need your approval anymore, he said. She never did. Heroes don't require permission to be heroic. They just are. You had one living in your house, and you were too blind to see it. As Ray's footsteps faded, my family stood in the wreckage of their assumptions, their pride scattered like the pieces of Mom's wine glass across the patio. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a battlefield after the fighting stops, when you realize the cost of what just happened. Emily, Dad said, my name a prayer and a plea, but I was already walking away, leaving them there among the cooling grills and forgotten burgers, the deflated balloons and scattered pride. Behind me, I heard Kyle whisper, "What have we done?" The answer was simple. They'd mistaken strength for weakness, service for failure, and a hero for a joke. Now they had to live with that truth. The beach was dark except for the moon's reflection on the water, stretching out like a silver path to nowhere. It was almost Mom. When I heard his footsteps in the sand, heavy, uncertain, the gait of a man carrying invisible weight, Dad appeared from the shadows, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, clutching something in his right hand. He stopped 10 feet away, as if there was a barrier he couldn't cross. In the moonlight, I could see he'd been crying, this man who'd taught me that tears were weakness, that Marines don't cry, that strength meant never showing pain. "I brought this," he said, his voice hoarse. He held out his hand, revealing my distinguished flying cross. I went to your room. I hope you don't mind. I needed to see it, to understand." The metal caught the moonlight, its bronze surface reflecting the stars. I'd hidden it so well, but not well enough apparently. "The citation," he continued, struggling with each word. "Even with the redactions, it says extraordinary heroism. It says complete disregard for personal safety. It says saved 12 service members under heavy enemy fire while wounded." His voice broke. "Wounded. You were wounded, and you kept flying. Shrapnel in my left shoulder," I said quietly. "Went through the door. Didn't have time to treat it. Too many others bleeding out." He made that sound again, that wounded animal noise that seemed to come from his soul. He sank to his knees in the sand, still holding my medal like a rosary. "I was so proud of my bronze star," he whispered. 90% vehicle readiness rate. That's what I got my medal for, making sure trucks ran on time in peacetime Germany. I built my whole identity on it. The veteran, the Marine, the hero." He looked up at me, tears streaming freely now. "And I mocked my daughter who flew through hell itself to save lives." "You didn't know," I said, but the words felt hollow. "That's not an excuse." He slammed his fist into the sand. "I didn't want to know. You're right. When you came home different, quieter, broken in places I couldn't see, it was easier to call you weak than to admit I didn't understand. Easier to mock PTSD than to acknowledge that real combat, real service, had touched my family and I couldn't relate to it." He pulled something else from his pocket, a folded piece of paper, worn from reading. "I found this too. The letter from Commander Dalton. He called you an angel. Said you held his intestines inside his body for 40 minutes while flying through a sandstorm. Said you sang to him to keep him conscious, told him about his kids to keep him fighting. Dad's shoulders shook with sobs. My little girl, covered in blood, singing to dying men while flying a broken helicopter through enemy fire. And I called you weak. Dad! No. He stood suddenly, sand flying. No, you don't get to comfort me. Not after what I've done. Do you understand what I've taken from you? Your service, your sacrifice, your honor. I mocked it all. I made your trauma a punchline. I turned your heroism into shame. What kind of father does that? The moon went behind a cloud, plunging us into deeper darkness. In that darkness, his voice became confessional. I was terrified, he admitted. When you came home changed, when I saw what real war had done to you, I was terrified, because if someone as strong as you could break, what did that make me? A fake, a pretender, a man-playing soldier who never saw a day of real combat? The cloud passed, and I could see him clearly again, this man who'd loomed so large in my childhood, now small and broken on a dark beach. You were jealous, I said, understanding flooding through me. You were jealous of your own daughter. He nodded, unable to deny it. You did what I always dreamed of. Real combat, real heroism, real medals earned in blood, not bureaucracy. And instead of being proud, instead of celebrating you, I diminished you to protect my own ego. You weren't protecting your ego, I said, my voice steady. You were protecting your identity. If you admitted what I'd done, you'd have to admit what you hadn't done, and that would mean rebuilding yourself from scratch. He stood there, my medal still in his hand, looking at it like it was burning him. Can you forgive me? He asked, his voice barely audible over the waves. I looked at this man who'd raised me to be strong, who'd taught me about honor and courage, who'd then torn me down when I embodied those very things. The father who'd been my hero until I became one myself. Forgiveness isn't the question, I said finally. The question is whether you can live with the truth, not the story you've told yourself for 40 years, but the truth, that your bronze star for vehicle maintenance doesn't make you less of a person, that your service, even without combat, still mattered, that you don't need to diminish others to validate yourself. He tried to hand me my medal, but I shook my head. Keep it for tonight, I said. Look at it. Really look at it. Think about Thompson and Martinez. Think about the 12 men who came home. Think about what that medal cost, not in dollars or paperwork, but in blood and nightmares and pieces of soul that don't grow back. Emily, you didn't protect me, I said, the words coming out sharp and final. When I needed my father most, when I came home broken from war, you didn't protect me. You protected your pride. And that's something we both have to live with. I turned and walked back toward the house, leaving him there with my medal and his regret. Behind me, I heard him fall to his knees again, sobbing into the sand, the sound of a man finally understanding the weight of the honor he'd mocked and the daughter he'd failed. At the door, I looked back once. He was still kneeling, holding my distinguished flying cross up to the moonlight, seeing it truly for the first time. The sunrise painted the Carolina coast in shades of gold and crimson, the same colors as the flames I'd flown through in Yemen. My Jeep was packed, everything I owned fitting into 3 duffel bags and a cardboard box of medals I'd probably never display. 5:30, and the house was silent except for the sound of Mom crying in the kitchen, trying to muffle it with a dish towel. Kyle stood by my vehicle, hollow-eyed from a sleepless night. He'd withdrawn his SEAL application at 3A, sending the email while I watched. I'm not ready, he'd said. I thought I knew what courage was, but I don't know shit. You'll learn, I'd told him. Real courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing the job anyway. Now he helped me load the last bag, his hands shaking slightly. Where will you go? Virginia Beach first. Ray connected me with a veterans group there, real combat vets who understand. Then maybe west. There's a flight school in Colorado that needs instructors. civilian medical helicopters, saving lives without the bullets. Dad appeared in the doorway, aged a decade overnight. He held my distinguished flying cross in one hand, his bronze star in the other. Wordlessly, he walked to his truck and removed his veteran license plate, the one he'd displayed so proudly. He leaned it against the garage wall, then approached me slowly. "I stayed up all night," he said, his voice raw, "reading about medevac crews, the casualty rates, the missions, the YouTube videos of helicopters landing under fire." He held out my medal. "This belongs to a hero. That's not me. That was never me." I took the distinguished flying cross, its weight familiar in my palm. Then I looked at his bronze star. "This belongs to someone who served," I said. "That is you. The mistake wasn't being proud of your service, Dad. The mistake was thinking there was only one way to be a warrior." He tried to pin it back on his shirt, but his hands shook too much. Mom came outside, still in her bathrobe, makeup smeared from crying. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time, not her daughter, but the soldier, the pilot, the medic who'd held dying men while flying through hell. "The nightmares," she said softly. "Will they ever stop?" "No," I said honestly. "But I'm learning to live with them. They're part of me now, like scars. You can't erase scars. Mom, you can only decide whether they define you or refine you." I climbed into the driver's seat, adjusting the rearview mirror. Hanging from it were 2 items: my Echo 9 Challenge coin and a small photo of Thompson and Martinez in better days, smiling in front of our helicopter. My ghosts, traveling with me. "Emily," Dad called out as I started the engine. "The things I said, the jokes, the mockery, they thought silence made me small," I said, looking at him through the open window. "But truth made me free." I pulled away slowly, watching in the mirror as my family grew smaller. Dad standing there with his bronze star, Mom leaning against him, Kyle with his hands in his pockets. They'd have to rebuild now, reconstruct their understanding of service, of strength, of what it means to be a hero. That was their journey, not mine. The radio crackled to life classic rock, the same station Dad always played. I turned it off, preferring the silence. But it wasn't really silence. It was the sound of helicopter rotors that would never fully fade, the echo of voices calling for help, the whispered names of the dead, my constant companions. 10 miles out of town, I pulled over at a scenic overlook. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, and somewhere beyond that horizon was Yemen, where parts of me would always remain. I held my medal up to the morning light, reading the inscription one more time, "For extraordinary heroism." They'd laughed at my trauma, mocked my service, dismissed my sacrifice. But Commander Ray Dalton had stood up and spoken the truth into a microphone, shattering their illusions with simple facts. No violence, no revenge, just truth. Delivered at the perfect moment to the right audience. The kind of precision strike that would have made any tactical officer proud. I thought about Ray's salute, the first real recognition I'd received since coming home. About the look on Dad's face when he realized he'd been mocking a hero. About Kyle's shattered assumptions and Mom's desperate tears. They'd built a monument to false valor while real valor sat at their dinner table, suffering in silence. But I wasn't silent anymore. The sun climbed higher, warming my face through the windshield. Somewhere, Ray was probably having breakfast with his kids who had a father because of me. Somewhere, 11 other men were living lives that should have ended in the Yemen desert. And somewhere in a box under my childhood bed, letters of gratitude gathered dust because I hadn't been ready to read them, to accept that I was worthy of thanks. I was ready now. Starting the engine again, I pulled back onto the highway, heading north toward whatever came next. In the rearview mirror, my challenge coin spun slowly, catching the light. "Night Stalkers don't quit." It read, "I didn't quit. Not in Yemen when everything was burning. Not at home when the nightmares came. Not at that party when they laughed at my pain. and not now, driving toward a future where my truth was finally spoken, my service finally honored, even if it took a stranger's voice to make it heard. They thought silence made me small. They thought my trauma was weakness. They thought a woman who'd been broken by war was something to mock. But that night, when Ray grabbed the microphone and told my truth, they learned what I'd always known: heroes aren't the ones who come home unchanged. Heroes are the ones who come home carrying the weight of the lives they saved and the ones they couldn't, who wake up screaming but still get out of bed, who bear witness to humanity's worst and still choose to heal. I am Emily Ward. I was Echo 9. I saved 12 men and lost 2. I have PTSD and I have a Distinguished Flying Cross, and both are equally part of my story. They thought silence made me small, but truth made me free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect with fellow listeners around the world. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about Emily's journey. Your perspectives and experiences matter, and this community grows stronger when we share our truths together.